Hello everyone, thank you for joining me today. This video is a bit of a departure from what I normally do. Normally on this channel I will read poems and comment on the poems, and it's been pretty much explicitly poems for about 103 videos. But somebody who follows me on the channel uh, was responding to a video I did about sort of favorite quotes. It was a tag challenge thing that I was responding to, and in it I mentioned that I had wanted to refer to a section from Faulkner, but I didn't have the book with me at the time, and they were like, "Well, go get it and come back and do another one." And I was inspired and accepted the challenge, so I brought my book home. This is from Go Down Moses by William Faulkner, and there's a section in here. It's really kind of a novella. It's a very long short story called The Bear, which is probably one of the best things that I've ever read. Not just in American literature, but just everything of all the stuff that I've read. This stands out to me, this novella or very long short story, as um, beautiful and complex and aesthetically challenging and quite frankly mystical. And it speaks to me in a lot of ways that I think is just masterful and beautiful. I encountered Faulkner when I was in high school reading Barn Burning, and at the time I did not appreciate him because I didn't understand him. I was not a good enough reader at the time to get what Faulkner was doing. Since then, I've revisited Barn Burning, and I've tortured another generation of students with it. Um, but one of the things, Faulkner now is kind of a Mount Rushmore writer for me. He's one of my very favorites, and I think one of the very best. And one of the things that he's known for doing is writing these extremely long sentences that have all of these nested clauses in them and really stretching sentences to their extreme in certain ways. And in doing that, they can get this cumulative kind of snowball quality to them that ends up, performing this kind of grandiose statement or this grandiose gesture that I think imbues the sentences with far more than just a single unit of information, which is the way that we usually understand them. And so today I want to share two passages, actually. And one is from The Bear and one is from Barn Burning, as I said. And I think I'll start, actually, I was going to start with The Bear. I think I'll start with the Barn Burning just because that's the one that I came across first. And this is a single sentence, actually. So I have it pulled up over here on my other screen. And just as some context, Barn Burning is kind of a coming of age story about Sardi Snopes, whose father burns barns, among other pretty unacceptable behavior. He's not a very good role model. And because he burns barns, it's determined at the beginning in this court that's in a convenience store that he owes money to, he flees, and then he ends up, he's supposed to, work for Major Despain to sort of pay it back, and he ends up sullying his very expensive rug with horse poop that he steps in. And as another barn burns, then the justice of the peace comes after him, and the father basically makes Sardi make this choice between your blood and your duty, right? He says, if you don't have your blood, you have nothing. And so basically he's saying the right thing to do is always just to protect me, justice. Your duty is not justice, your duty is loyalty. And so Sardi has a crisis moment when he thinks he hears his father actually being killed, where he is then fleeing. And this is very near the end of the story. This is one long sentence as he's running away. He could not hear either. The galloping mare was almost upon him before he had heard her, and even then he held his course, as if the very urgency of his wild grief and need must in a moment more find him wings, waiting until the ultimate instant to hurl himself aside and into the weed-choked roadside ditch as the horse thundered past and on, for an instant in furious silhouette against the stars, the tranquil early summer night sky, which even before the shape of the horse and rider vanished, stained abruptly and violently upward. A long swirling roar, incredible and soundless, blotting the stars, and he springing up and into the road again, running again, knowing it was too late, yet still running even after he heard the shot, and an instant later 2 shots, pausing now without knowing he had ceased to run, crying, "Pap! Pap!" running again before he knew he had even begun to run, stumbling, tripping over something, scrabbling up again without ceasing to run, looking backward over his shoulder at the glare as he got up, running on among the invisible trees, panting, sobbing, Father, Father. I think this is just a wonderful, masterful sentence. It's a way of putting us into the consciousness of the main character, Sardi, without going into first person, by elongating this into what's a pretty extreme run-on sentence for the purpose of depicting the franticness of his run and his inability to orient himself within the world that he sees it. He feels almost spirited away or almost sort of compelled or carried through rather than actively fleeing. We get several things in here, right before it talked about him not being able to see because his blood and his breath are roaring. He can't hear either. So it's almost like when you're in that fight or flight response, you lose your bearings, you become disoriented, and you lose your ability to kind of locate yourself. Also, it's nighttime, and he hears this galloping horse behind him, so he runs even further with urgency and grief. It speaks as though he's sort of finding wings, almost as though he's flying away and he's transcending the situation that he's in. There's also this feeling of himself being compelled or being hurled as the horse thunders by him, a horse that he doesn't see. And then he sees a silhouette against the stars. So there's this kind of like phantom image that he has that, again, he can't make out. He just sees the outline of a figure for. Yet the summer night is still kind of tranquil, despite all of these things going on around him. It's the horse and the rider and the situation that are making things violent. So there's a juxtaposition between the tranquil summer night sky and then the human activity below that is causing this crisis or this dilemma that he's in. And then there's again this swirling roar, but then a soundless blotting of stars. So we have within it another kind of paradox where he can't hear anything but this seeming roar, which doesn't really register to him as a sound. And then we get this continual running again, knowing it was too late, yet still running. He's not actively making a decision. He's just fleeing. He's just reacting, running even after he heard a shot an instant later, 2 shots. So Faulkner doesn't say 3 total shots. He puts us exactly in the moment as we're kind of experiencing it like Sardi does. A shot, 2 shots. And then there's that repetition. He pauses. It says knowing that he didn't cease to run. So he stopped and didn't really register stopping. He just reacts and he yells back, pap, pap, which is kind of an onomatopoeia for the 2 shots, shot, shot, pap, pap. So he yells back to thinking that it's his father that's been killed here. And then running again before he knew he had started running. So just as he stops without being conscious of it, he then continues again without being conscious of it, stumbling, tripping. We get all of these present progressive nouns going through, variations of kind of the way in which he's carrying on. We get scrabbling up and down, ceasing to run, looking backward over his shoulder. Among the invisible trees, that's another of these kind of paradoxical images that are here, that the narrator records for us that there are trees, but that they're invisible. And obviously trees can't be literally invisible, but it's this idea that they're there and you don't really register that you're among trees because you're in such a overstimulated kind of whirlwind here. And then he stops, panting and sobbing, Father, Father. And so pap, pap within the sentence merges to Father, Father, which represents that through this flight that Sardi has, he's completed the arc of the coming of age from a little boy who might refer to pap, pap to now Father, Father. And even though he's doing that, it's still this very painful thing that he's stopping and he's sobbing and panting. He's out of breath. And this is very near the end of the story. There's 2 paragraphs left, and we get at the very end a pretty famous line that he did not look back, which for me represents that he doesn't look back to see what happened to the father that he once had allegiance to, because he's made the decision to go on and to not look back into the past and back into those ways in which he felt tied to blood and tied to duty, that he's made, that he's severed the connection and he's made the choice. Although in making the choice, he's carried on by something almost spiritual, because it's intuited, but it's not a conscious decision that happens. It's as though he's carried and compelled, and I think it's just a wonderful uh, depiction of that in ways that is not strictly descriptive, but that kind of performs the thing that it's suggesting. There's a similar one in The Bear, and this is not one full sentence, though there are some long sentences in here. It is one full paragraph. And just for a brief context with The Bear, um, the main character is 16 years old and is out in the woods. So it's again kind of a coming of age. And he's hunting with the family. He is one in the line of a legacy of hunters who go out into the woods near this place and try to hunt this mythical, gigantic, seemingly immortal, indomitable, it's going to say, bear called Old Ben. So it has this name, and it's outlasted generations of men and their horses and their dogs that have tried to track it down. It seems to be this kind of invincible behemoth figure that is a kind of representation of the force of nature itself, at once awesome and terrifying. So I think what you're going to hear within this is a representation of nature as almost sublime. I think a lot of Moby Dick when I'm reading this description. So it says, this is from page 182 to 183 in the Go Down Moses. He realized later that it had begun long before that. It had already begun on the day when he first wrote his age in 2 ciphers, and his cousin McCaslin brought for him the first time to camp, the big woods, to earn for himself from the wilderness the name and state of hunter, provided he in his turn were humble and enduring enough. He had already inherited then, without ever having seen it, the big old bear, with one trap-ruined foot in that area almost 100 miles square, had earned for himself a name, a definite designation like a living man, the long legend of corn cribs broken down and rifled, of shoats and grown pigs and even calves carried bodily into the woods and devoured, and traps and deadfalls overthrown, and dogs mangled and slain, and shotguns and even rifle shots delivered at point-blank range, yet with no more effect than so many peas blown through a tube by a child. A corridor of wreckage and destruction, beginning back before the boy was born, through which sped, not fast, but rather with the ruthless and irresistible deliberation of a locomotive, the shaggy, tremendous shape. It ran, in his knowledge, before he ever saw it. It loomed and towered in his dreams before he even saw the unaxed woods where it left its crooked print, shaggy, tremendous, red-eyed, not malevolent, but just big. Too big for the dogs which tried to bay it, for the horses which tried to ride it down, for the men and the bullets they fired into it. Too big for the very country, which was its constricting scope. It was as if the boy had already divined what his senses and intellect had not encompassed yet. That doomed wilderness whose edges were being constantly and punily gnawed at by men with plows and axes, who feared it because it was wilderness. Men myriad and nameless, even to one another in the land where the old bear had earned a name, and through which ran not even a mortal beast, but an anachronism, indomitable and invincible, out of an old dead time, a phantom, epitome and apotheosis of the wild life which the puny humans swarmed and hacked at in a fury of abhorrence and fear, like pygmies about the ankles of a drowsing elephant. The old bear, solitary, indomitable, and alone, widowered, childless, and absolved of mortality, old Priam, reft of his old wife, and outlived all his sons. Whew. I mean, that just, again, reading it, I'm getting goosebumps. It's just such a stunning passage. We get the setup that the boy is being brought into the woods in order to make his name as a hunter, along with the other men in his family within that tradition. And this idea that you have to go out there into the wilderness and earn your name and earn your state of hunter. And yet the bear, Old Ben, already has that, which is an attempt by the men to personify the bear, because personifying it makes it understandable, even though it's this thing that is beyond comprehension or understanding. It's something that his mind and his senses can't wrap itself around, but that it seems as though he's already divined or intuited. That within his being a part of this family, he also inherits this memory of the bear and the way that the bear lingers not only around the woods, but also within the imagination of the people themselves, as a way of understanding your place in nature as being subservient to or being powerless in front of. That as much as you might try to hunt and to conquer and to kill, there are these aspects of nature like Old Ben that are seemingly of a completely ancient and distant time and that are going to outlive you far into the future. And we hear this, there's wonderful setups here sonically with alliteration where we get the living legend of corn cribs, um, as it's setting up the descriptions of what the boy knows, what he heard about from presumably his elders, and all the ways in which the body, the body of the bear, took down pigs, calves, dogs, right? And then even the shotguns and the rifle shots delivered at point blank range with no more effect than peas blown through the tube by a child. I think that's such an effective simile that you can just think of like little kids doing, and that might just kind of hit you and bounce off. You might not even notice it. And these shotgun and rifle shots are seeming to do that to the bear, not really registering or injuring him at all. And so he's like this massive kind of impenetrable tank figure, which again is referenced here as the deliberation of a locomotive, which I think is really interesting within the context of the story that's in the very recently post-Civil War. So we're thinking, 1870s, 1880s, but they're referring here to these locomotives, which is something that would be a very new way of conceptualizing of something being large and lumbering and kind of impermeable. So the bear is compared to this impierceable locomotive, but also at the same time as this thing that predates all of these people, all of the men that try to bring it down. It says beginning, he doesn't even understand the wreckage and the destruction that were beginning back before he was born. So it's almost as though it's in there that the bear already knows about him and is sort of waiting for him. It says it ran in his knowledge before he even saw it. It loomed and towered in his dreams before he even saw the unaxed woods where it left its crooked print. So it's like this kind of specter or phantom, like being haunted by something that you're unable to have an exact picture of or conceive of, but that intuitively inside your spirit and inside your bones. And despite all of this destruction, it's described as not malevolent, but just big, right? Too big for everything that tries to bring it down. And I think this is interesting in ways we might think of aspects of nature, whether it's large beasts or even like weather, for example. We often, if a hurricane hits and kills a lot of people, we obviously mourn this and we think about it as an evil, but in a sense, nature does not have that kind of consciousness of malevolence or of intention to do harm and to murder the way humans do, but we project that upon aspects of nature, assuming that they have like an evil, vengeful spirit. That's our way of kind of understanding it because it's something that we have and that we would do. And yet it says the boy had already divined, right? And again, to divine something is to kind of read and to intuit it, to know it before intellect and consciousness. But I think it's a really nice use of that word because divine also has a connotation of being something that is spiritual, almost godlike. And we're going to hear in a minute that the bear is described as almost being immortal. So which is why I used the word earlier, behemoth from the Old Testament, right? We get a inclusion here about it being punily gnawed at by men with plows and axes. So like these little men that just have these kind of like small pickaxes or something that can't do any damage to it. And it says, who feared it because it was wilderness. So this thing that's unknown, that doesn't abide by our logic, but that we go out into its own space. And despite the fact that we go out looking for it, we're afraid of it. And there's something interesting within that psychologically of wanting to seek out and confront the terror of, again, what I'm going to call kind of the sublime or the abyss, right? To look into something that is completely um, ununderstandable, inconceivable, and that you're at once in awe and impressed by it, but also terrified because it completely dwarfs you. Um, so the bear, it says the bear itself had earned a name, which the boy has not yet, right? The boy has a name, of course, but it hasn't earned the reputation the way that the bear has. So there's a sense of respect there as well. Describes him not even a mortal beast, but an anachronism. So it's like he's from an earlier time where like dinosaurs roamed the earth. Like he's this prehistorical, primordial creature that is a remnant of an earlier time, like a woolly mammoth or something. Indomitable and invincible out of an old, dead time. So even out of its time where things passed along and everything else has wasted away, it was still formidable enough to be a remnant from that time, almost like these giant kind of crocodiles or alligators or something that we still have around. And it says epitome and apotheosis of the old life, which puny humans swarmed and hacked at in a fury of abhorrence and fear. So what's interesting is abhorrence there is the hatred, right? The hatred is tied to the fear, even though we hear that the bear is not actually malevolent. The malevolence is within the humans. So humans react with the violence and the vengeance and the hatred toward nature, which they fear because it cannot be conquered or understood, but which itself does not have an evil aspect to it. And then we get a repetition here of the old bear, solitary, indomitable, alone, widowered and childless, and absolved of mortality. So its wife was killed, and all of its children are killed, presumably, right? Absolved of mortality is shocking to me because that's the narrator within the consciousness of the boy, suggesting that the bear cannot die. It's been there long before you. It will be there long after you. And yet there's still this ritual wherein you have to go and seek it out and do some sort of battle with it in order to get a name. And then the last line that we're given here is old Priam reft of his wife and outlived all his sons. So Priam, of course, being the king of Troy from the Iliad, who is also loses his wife and sees his sons felled by the invading army, and that's what the allusion is to. The allusion is to the most ancient myth within Western literature, the Iliad, and that the bear is kind of tied into, tied into the great myths of our culture, right alongside Achilles, for example. Something else really quickly that I think adds to this being truly a mystical description, a mystical experience here, is the way in which there's this kind of rolling polysyndeton throughout the section. And a polysyndeton is the overuse of conjunctions within a sentence to render it basically grammatically incorrect. We tend to do commas in a series. There's three things, right? You say, go to the grocery store, get milk, eggs, and cheese. And right at the end signals that it's the last one in the series and that the sentence is coming to an end. By adding several ands throughout this sentence, or these sentences, there adds an interminability to the list, as though all of the descriptions and all of the associations and similes and metaphors and allusions that the narrator is trying to give still do not encapsulate the very nature of this bear, that it seems to escape or transcend the descriptive power of language. As many of these things as we can accumulate to describe it, it's those things and more. Which is why I think it's being described as this kind of godlike presence, because it's said that whatever is said about God is false. We can't render all of that into language, because the being itself extends beyond that. And it also just kind of gives this sense of, I think, the grandness of it, that we have this long passage describing an animal, but giving it all of these additional associations that normal animals don't get. It becomes a force beyond the capacity of the humans to understand, but one which they have this unconscious desire to go and see, because it reminds them of kind of their place in the world, but it also reminds them of their mortality and the threat and the precariousness of their own lives that they live in. I hope you enjoyed both passages. I'm very passionate about them. I love them a lot. I think Faulkner's, again, one of the best. If you have anything to add to this, I'd be happy to see it. And thank you for listening and for watching. Be well.